Okay, here we are, and it's time to go to give the floor to Leah for this first meeting in the series that we have with her. The title today, to the conversation of today, is Padova Model UPR: Concept, Practical Design, and Structure. And then the next chapters will be devoted to evaluation and follow-up, learning experience, and delivery training modules. Correct? So we have a full program behind us. And well, it's over to you, Leah.
Thank you very much, Professor. So I have a presentation prepared and I'll just share my screen, which, perfect. I'm just going to keep it like this because if I do the full screen, sometimes the slides don't move as I need them to, and that might be a bit confusing. So good afternoon and good evening from what is unfortunately a very rainy Northern Ireland. It's an absolute pleasure to be invited to talk about something that's now become quite a formative part of my life in recent years, and I've thoroughly enjoyed my time helping the Human Rights Centre design and deliver the Padova Model UPR. My name is Leah Rea and I am a PhD candidate at Ulster University. And before I proceed, I feel this year's Secretariat will not be happy with me if I did not, for the purposes of this recording, advertise that the 6th edition of the Padova Model UPR, the application process is now open. We do have 2 deadlines in place for students who are enrolled at non-Italian universities. The deadline for applications for your teams is the 15th of September, and the deadline for students who are enrolled in Italian universities for you to submit your team application is the 6th of October. And you can find more information about this year's model and including our available roles for states, NHRIs and INGOs on the Human Rights Centre's webpage on the Padova website. So just briefly a bit about myself. I have said that I'm a PhD candidate and a teaching assistant at Ulster University, but in terms of my relationship with the Padova Model UPR, I was a participant in the 2021 edition where myself and a fantastic colleague, who's still a very close friend, represented the NHRI of Great Britain. I then subsequently was a member of the Secretariat delivering the model for the 2022 edition. And now lastly, I serve as the facilitator for the Secretariat, who are in charge of designing and delivering the model for 2023. So just by way of a quick overview of what I'm hoping to present to you this evening, and hopefully then invite some discussion thereafter, because this process is one which we very much continuously reflect and review on our structure to date, our design of the model, and then subsequently for anyone listening who may wish to recreate the model within their own institution, to take away some ideas and suggestions. So before we have that discussion, the presentation will cover 2 parts. Firstly, I will quickly provide an overview of the concept of a model UPR in general, but specifically Padova Model UPR, understanding the objectives of the project, why you would organise and deliver a model UPR, and I have Padova in brackets because I'm conscious there could be those in the future who wish to replicate the model into their own institution. And then subsequently, what management processes do we use to design and deliver the Padova Model UPR? Part 2, then, I will give an overview of the practical parts of the Padova Model UPR using the existing structures and processes that we have in place. So looking at what would be the organisation and delivery of our rules of the simulation, looking at how we run the model primarily through a student-led secretariat, moving on then to organising the programme and the role of project management in SEAM, and then looking at the various components of what makes the simulation or what makes the Padova Model UPR. So covering the design of the simulation, the aspects of promotion and outreach and wider communications, I suppose, looking at how we review our application processes and design the application system, how we select participants, how we train our participants so they can become fully involved and engaged in the simulation when held on site in November. Then how we design and coordinate the simulation as an on-site simulation, and then lastly looking at evaluation. And evaluation here is twofold in terms of both how we monitor and assess participants' own participation in the simulation, but then equally how do we enable some type of process where we can evaluate the model itself. Now, I will be delivering a webinar looking specifically at that subsequent to this one, so this is more just introducing that concept, I suppose, in advance of that week's webinar. So what is the Padova Model UPR? Primarily, it is a very unique simulation. It is an academic simulation of the existing UPR process. And I stress that within the Padova Model UPR, we look really at the first and second stages of the existing UPR process, that pre-review and review aspects. And we really, I suppose, structure the simulation in a way that's quite intensive. And by that, I mean, we really compile those two stages into a sudden several-day process, which really enables us to see how participants can respond to the challenge of that on-site, but it also allows for a really richly rewarding process, which allows participants to see for themselves what a UPR process would look like. It's quite unique in that it's organised primarily by students and former delegates and former participants of the Padova model themselves, alongside ongoing support from the Human Rights Centre and senior staff at the Human Rights Centre, as well as some staff who are involved in delivering the master's programme in Human Rights and Multi-Level Governance at Padova. And it's designed, as I've noted, to really reflect on the existing UPR process. So key to the Padova Model UPR is that sense of assigning representative roles to participants and enabling them to participate as though they were serving in these roles in a real life scenario in a formal simulation. And it's incredibly important that I emphasize the fact that though we do have the application process and we allow for applicants to stipulate the roles they themselves wish to hold, be that as a state, an NHRI or an INGO, our evaluation process sometimes finds that we feel that teams may be better suited to roles which they actually haven't applied for. We've also this year implemented a new mechanism around that, which I can touch on later in the application process. But I suppose one of the takeaways from this, particularly for anyone who may wish to consider recreating this model or considering a challenge this model faces, is how do we connect applicants who have submitted an application for a certain role to the role which actually may be more appropriate for them based on the evaluation of their existing skill sets, their experiences, and their academic background. And I also really want to emphasize that diplomatic presentation, formality, and professional conduct is really at the heart of the Padova Model UPR. There can be similar model schemes, such as the Model United Nations or other UN-related simulations that take place in both academic and non-academic contexts, which are not as formal as the real systems that they model are. The Padova Model UPR challenges that because we wish to see participants act as though they themselves really were the representative delegation of a state or representatives from an NHRI. This is not just a class-based structure. This is something which really can ensure participants deliver on the basis of existing skill sets, a really authentic experience for themselves and their team and their wider colleagues. And in so doing, the Padova model ensures that participants really build on those skills and abilities that are essential, whether within an academic programme, but for us thinking forward, for those students who may graduate and wish to take a role within a professional setting in the field of international human rights, for example, or within law or political science. So the Padova Model UPR is not just an academic simulation insofar as it's facilitating students' learning, allowing them to bring their knowledge and understanding from existing classes into this simulation. It's a learning experience as well in terms of professional skill sets, transferable skills, and employability. And it's also an opportunity for them to almost, in a sense, be like within an internship environment. For the purposes of the model, we do consider our participants as delegates, and they will be referred to by their roles and their titles for the duration of their time on the programme. And that to us emphasises the professional aspect of the model and the professionalism that we expect of our participants throughout their time in this project and with us in the Padova model. Also, something I think that really distinguishes the Padova Model UPR, both just as a simulation, but also specifically in that sense of international law and international human rights, we provide a comprehensive training programme. And that is because, as I think I've been able to elaborate on, we do expect a very high standard of professionalism from our participants. And we also realise that it's not something you can just walk into in order to ensure a really successful simulation. And that for us isn't just participants putting in their assignments on time and being able to stand up and present. It also means they come away feeling they have learned something and realising they've accomplished something. We feel it's important to provide training to our participants. The training programme covers each composite part of the simulation, starting from understanding what the UPR process is for our participants and how we recreate that in Padova. But equally, it touches on the written and oral assessments that participants are expected to contribute and deliver on during the simulation, and not just on site, but advance of the on-site simulation. We also focus on the importance of lobbying and alliance building, which is very reflective of the actual UPR process itself, and therefore adds to the authenticity of the Padova Model UPR. The training programme also offers an opportunity for us to emphasise to participants the importance of timekeeping, time management, research-led tasks, and working within teams, as well as working with other colleagues, particularly if they're engaging in alliance building, which again really emphasises, I think, the skills-based component, as well as that wider sense of employability that the Padova Model UPR provides to students. And then, as I just touched on there, something else I think that really separates the Padova Model UPR from other simulations or mock roles that can be provided at different pathways, we do require our participants to prepare and submit written and oral assessments. And this starts in advance of the simulation. This will firstly require for them to research what their titles and their roles will be as delegates or representatives, be it of a state, an INGO, or an NHRI. So right from the outset, our participants are given the opportunity to really thoroughly immerse themselves in the process and adopt an authentic title for their time with us in the simulation. Other assessments will include, depending on the role which you are assigned, preparation of national reports, which will require a really thorough research progress into your designated state, understanding its, I suppose, history and record within the UPR process. Also for an NHRI, how the NHRI has performed within the existing UPR process and wider international treaty body monitoring processes. Equally, there could be the submission of reports from NHRIs and INGOs. We also require for our participants to design lobbying plans and then subsequently evaluate their own lobbying, I suppose, processes and outcomes. So not only do we encourage our participants to commit to paper their understanding of lobbying and alliance building, we ask for them to reflect on their successes or perhaps areas where they could have improved on, reflect on that process and evaluate themselves. So we also strongly encourage independent thought, critical thinking, and evaluation skill sets and capabilities within the Padova Model UPR. Which, when you consider how intense the process is, it's quite a remarkable achievement, but it's something that tends to come away in our evaluation processes from students who have engaged in simulation, that though they found it intensive, they realised how rewarding each component was, particularly that sense of seeing their plan being put into action and lobbying and being able to reflect on that. And then lastly, that sense of the oral assessment. Participants are assessed when they conduct themselves and they present at each stage of the simulation. And it's something that we are quite strong about in terms of the authenticity, the professional conduct, the professional language, the diplomatic language, and we incorporate into our training programme examples of this. But it also means that participants are coming away with the enhanced skill of public speaking and also persuasive language, which is so important. And it's also quite an achievement because many of our participants to date do not have English as a first or maybe even a second language. And because the simulation is held in English, that also allows for many of our participants to be able to say with confidence that they can conduct themselves in this professional competitive environment in a language that's not their mother tongue, which also again contributes to their employability, as well as their understanding of how these processes are reflected in the international law sphere, and again, of course, contributing to authenticity. So the objectives of the project then, just to summarise really why we do this, it's primarily to really enhance knowledge and understanding of the international human rights system, multilateral system of rights monitoring, and I suppose also multilateral diplomacy. And this provides a really important opportunity for students of international relations, human rights law, international law, to put into practice that which they have studied and maybe written dissertations on, or maybe have even professional experience in. And in so doing, they also help enhance knowledge and understanding of these spheres with their own colleagues as they engage. It's also helping to enhance knowledge and understanding of the existing UPR process, and that sense also of understanding where states lie, I suppose, in terms of their compliance with their obligations under international human rights law, which in recent years has, of course, with different contexts around the world, be it conflict or not, is really, really pertinent now. And our students, therefore, by participating in the Padova model, understanding how to research using databases, the existing reports and documents submitted to UPR processes, they are enhanced with this knowledge and equipped with these skills that they can then transfer into the world of employability and understand, therefore, the world around them. It also helps contribute to understanding what we mean really by monitoring human rights, or rights monitoring, as well as rights compliance. And this also can be particularly important for our participants who wish to pursue these spheres of law as a career, or work perhaps in research and policy or advisory roles, by having the opportunity to see for themselves how these processes are conducted. It also has a very contemporary flavour by way of an objective in terms of trying to really position what are contemporary human rights issues. And as someone who has been involved in some shape or form since 2021, it's been so rewarding to see how different participants can cover what are pressing human rights issues within their own participation. As you can probably imagine, at the minute, green or environmental human rights issues always come through quite strongly, as do Indigenous rights, for example, and workers' rights. And it's just wonderful to see how this project can help participants connect the dots, so to speak, in terms of contemporary issues and analysing them through a human rights lens and through a human rights-based approach. It also helps empower students, I think, to understand geopolitical context, geopolitical relations, and existing political alliances, which in the international sphere at the minute is, of course, particularly very, very relevant and very important. And then in terms of, I suppose, just the key competencies, the Padova model as I've alluded to in previous slides in this presentation, really helps our participants enhance their existing skill sets in research, and particularly independently led research, working within a team to meet deadlines and to engage with others in a professional conduct within a public speaking sphere as well. But in something I think we can maybe forget about because we're focused on the academic side, the Padova Model UPR is also just an excellent opportunity to really promote an international community and to really enhance existing partnerships or relationships with students from different parts of not just Europe, but even different parts of the world. We are really proud to have both serving in the executive in the current times, but also in executives and participants in previous editions, students from many countries, bringing with them their own perceptions and experiences into this process. And there have been opportunities for friendship building, relationship building across participants and secretariat members. So the model also offers that opportunity to really help bring together a spirit, I suppose, and cohesiveness because of the structure of the project. And then finally, even more generally, rights awareness, constantly helping to promote an agenda of rights awareness that also ties in with the existing UN SDGs. So why organise and deliver? Whether it's a Padova model or a general model UPR, it really comes back to, again, knowledge and understanding and being able to apply theory to practice. It helps our participants understand the various mechanisms and dynamics of the UPR beyond their textbooks and beyond current affairs and headline news. What's quite interesting, I think, is that we have those adoption of roles which participants have the opportunity to select for themselves through the application process. If they put in a very convincing application form, they can be assigned their preferred role. As I alluded to earlier, there may be occasions where, as part of our selection criteria, we feel they're actually more applicable for another role, but I'll touch on that in another slide. But that sense of being able to, I suppose, self-select or at very least self-apply is really important to the Padova model. And it allows really direct hands-on experience to be gained in the UPR context. And I put this in bold because I think it's very important. Delivering this type of model UPR allows for both experiencing and a greater understanding of what we mean by assessment of states' records and what we mean by understanding what are violations of human rights in an international law context, which I think is extremely important. But essentially, participants take away a really enriching experience because they have adopted a representative role. They have held that role not just for the couple of days of assimilation, but several weeks leading into the assimilation. It's a highly interactive process. It's something that takes place outside of a classroom. It's almost like I said, an employment context. And it's also, I think, that interactive element very important in what is our post-pandemic world, where we realize how we used to learn and how we used to teach maybe isn't applicable in a contemporary learning environment, and it maybe isn't something that really resonates with students. Students need more of a hands-on process to apply their skills and knowledge than something that just takes place within a classroom. And this, as an opportunity, is something that actually can deliver on that. So I've talked about why we have the model, what can be learned through the model, the objectives we hope to deliver by designing and implementing the Padova Model UPR or a wider Model UPR. So how do we go about doing it? How do we manage and design a Model UPR structure? Well, at Padova, something I think is very, very unique. It is, as I alluded to before, it's secretariat-led. And the secretariat are comprised of students and past participants, mostly based and studying at Padova, though we can have external students as well. I, for myself, last year was an external student and I'm an external facilitator this year. And this means that, pardon me, we firstly have direct hands-on learning, reflection, evaluation and learning because if the Secretariat is comprised of past participants, they understand how the process works, they understand what it's like to be an applicant and a participant, and can design and tailor components of an edition of the model accordingly. But also it means maybe in a sense they're more relatable, and it's easier to advertise and promote this opportunity to other students. But also fundamentally, it provides a fantastic learning experience for the Secretariat directly. So in previous slides, I've talked about the learning opportunities that can come as a participant of the Padova model. As a Secretariat member designing and delivering on the Padova Model UPR, there are also learning opportunities and experiences for you, which in turn can enhance your transferable skills and therefore enhance your employability, as well as help cultivate friendships and partnerships that can be both professional and non-professional. So I still keep in touch with other members of the Secretariat I worked with. They are my friends, and who knows where the future goes. They could become professional colleagues maybe in the future as well. But it's something that's, I think, extremely rewarding to be on the Secretariat with that in mind, the learning opportunities, but also the real ability to have colleagues who were also themselves past participants. Now, in order to do that, we don't select in the Padova Model UPR our Secretariat. We have, I suppose, a recruitment process. What happens is that, and I will expand on this point later in this presentation, but following the conclusion of a Model UPR at Padova, as part of the evaluation process, participants are offered the opportunity to express their interest in serving on the Secretariat for the next year's model. And we then subsequently hold, I suppose, a big public meeting online, where those who have expressed their interest are invited, and we have a conversation about what serving on the Secretariat entails, what the structure is like, what the timeframes are like, and then we work from that basis as a Secretariat. So we don't have a formal recruitment process. There isn't an application process or a vetting and selection process. We almost operate, I suppose, on an honours code principle. If you have expressed an interest, you've attended the first meeting, and you've said that you'd like to work and serve in this role, then we will work with you in a team-based structure. And it allows for a lovely blend, I think, of formal and informal relationships. We don't obviously have like a contract or stipulated hours to work. We very much are flexible and adaptable and work around the schedules and other commitments of the Secretariat members. And it therefore means that we have a lovely allocation of work and divisions of responsibility and labour across the Secretariat, but within a very friendly and supportive working environment as well. But I suppose, and we can touch on this later, there could be a discussion around whether we should or shouldn't have a formal recruitment process, or if that's something that for anyone who wishes to replicate the Padova Model UPR, something worth to consider. The division of work is conducted across teams. So we have the main Secretariat as the body, and then we have within that two main teams of concept and communications. Our management, therefore, is essentially twofold. We have design of the project, its frameworks, its structure in terms of assignment of roles for that year, for example, the design of the application form, which would fall under the concept team. And then we have anything and everything that's public facing, promotion, engagement, advertisement, falls under the communications team. And I'll touch on this later, but essentially it's up to the Secretariat on an understanding of their own skill set, their own professional interests or professional experiences, which role that they would like to occupy. Now, the design of the Padova Model UPR is very much comprised in stages, and some of those stages actually happen alongside one another. But as I said at the start of this presentation, we are very much about continuous self-reflection, evaluation and learning processes. So it should be no surprise that the very first stage in the design of a Padova Model UPR, we always review the previous edition, whether that's the handbook, the application form, evaluation criteria, the holding of the simulation itself. and review of participants' feedback for the evaluation process. We always review the previous edition because we want to see what we can carry forward, what may need to be slightly modified, what may need to be reviewed, or maybe we require some additional components like additional training, for example. So the Padova model can, in theory at least, continuously change, I suppose, in response to what we have identified or pressing needs or what we have heard from participants are possible suggestions that we can incorporate in a design and structure. We then have designing and selecting the roles which can be applied for that year's edition. Then we have a design of the process itself, which also includes the application and selection of participants and training processes. And then we have the on-site simulation itself. And I haven't put that on the slide, but I also should say the final stage is then obviously the evaluation process. So under this heading, I've talked about the rules, and I've purposely put rules in quotation marks because for the Padova Model UPR, and hopefully we'll have a discussion about this at the end of my presentation, our rulebook is the handbook, the Padova Model UPR handbook. We also have a separate document called the Rules of the Game, which really codify the handbook in terms of its structure into rules that are used for that year's edition. The reason why I've just said rules is because if in the event this could be replicated at another institution, you may want to refer to it by a different process, but the handbook for us is our rulebook, which I will expand on. So primary to the organisation, the design and delivery of the Padova Model UPR is the handbook. And I bore my secretariat members to death by constantly calling it the blueprint, but it's true. We could not conduct the simulation in its entirety, whether that's the application aspect or the training component that ties into the assessments. We could not conduct it without constantly referring to the handbook. And the handbook is very much a living document. It's something which we would continuously reflect upon in each subsequent secretariat cycle to consider what we feel needs to be slightly changed. Have we received feedback to say that there could be more use of graphics and tables, for example, that came through for this year's secretariat to consider. So it's a living document which we don't necessarily change the core component of, but we're always open to suggestions about, can we make something more simple? Can we expand on certain points more further? Should we include more diagrams, flow charts, anything that makes the content more accessible, which in our opinion can therefore make the simulation more accessible and therefore more enjoyable? We are open to considering. The handbook essentially details the objectives. Why have we designed the Padova Model UPR? Why do we run the Padova Model UPR? What we mean by teams and what are the roles and responsibilities of teams for both states, INGOs and NHRIs. And then we look at a chapter all about the assignments, which I touched on earlier. And essentially this chapter, chapter 3, is a walkthrough of how to approach the assignments if you are a participant. And it's something which I think I also bore participants with to tears, at least I did last year on the secretariat during training, by constantly saying, refer to the handbook. Everything is outlined within there. We then also have a chapter on procedures, and this basically talks about how you should conduct yourself during the simulation in a way that really reflects on and implements and incorporates what the actual procedures and therefore diplomatic conduct would be in the real UPR process. This year, we've included a chapter on evaluation and looking at how exactly we evaluate participants throughout the simulation. And it's something I think we can really expand further on in a new handbook, and also maybe include aspects like marking rubric or template of criteria, because I have found, at least in my experience, participants, if they know how they're going to be marked or how they're going to be assessed, can then incorporate more in terms of good practice or best practice into their own performances, be that their written assignments or their own presentation skills. That can therefore mean they're more confident and then can have a more enriching experience, which is then reflected across all participants and makes for a much more rewarding simulation. I've said standing orders because I consider the handbook, particularly that procedures chapter, to be almost like standing orders. I have a legislative studies background, so standing orders is very much my fore. The handbook, as I said, is a living document, which means it's not just something to be on a website to talk about how to possibly run this type of simulation. It's something that should be constantly read and referred to. It's a living document, it's a learning document, it's something which really should be constantly put into practice. So by standing orders, I mean, basically if a participant has a question and they put it to the secretariat, or they have a bit of confusion about how to approach something, the answer should be in the handbook. And therefore it should almost be considered as well like a frequently asked question document. Which also goes back to that point that it can continuously be modified or reviewed, because with each successive edition of the Padova Model UPR, through the feedback we receive from participants, at the end of the process, we realise maybe something needs to be made clearer. If we find ourselves having to constantly explain something, it's either because participants haven't read the handbook, or maybe they've read it but don't quite understand what it's saying. So again, we can always have that process of self-evaluation. Now, I have participant engagement with a question mark. Part and parcel of the simulation is that participants are required, not requested, they are required to read the handbook. And it's almost like a modular handbook for a module as part of their degree. And whenever we deliver the training, we will always make reference to specific chapters or specific pages that is being covered by the training. So written assessments, for example, we might say go to chapter 3 at this page or at this point to look at more specifically what the requirements are or what's expected and so on. The problem we've encountered across successive editions, and something that I think is a good takeaway in that broader understanding of issues and challenges in delivering a model UPR, is that of how do we ensure participants do actually read the handbook and they make sense of the handbook. That's why I have the question mark. Whilst we expect it of them, we will continuously reference the handbook in training. We will give citations to the handbook in training. We'll make reference to the handbook on our Moodle platform, which is the platform we use alongside the simulation. We just don't know if participants are actually doing that. So it might be worthwhile to consider maybe a more extreme example of a possible test of the handbook, or running a drop-in session for questions about the handbook. It's something worthwhile to discuss anyway, but essentially if participants aren't engaging with the handbook, that's where questions can arise, and you can have one of the best training programs you can design, but everything comes back to the handbook. So if participants aren't looking at the handbook, it can cause some confusion and difficulties down the line. As I said previously, we have a rules of the game document, and how that's distinguishable from the handbook. If your handbook is your blueprint, which can be used and applied as the core component across all editions of the Padova Model UPR, we will be reviewing the handbook, but the handbook will be used in 10 years' time, hopefully 20 years' time. The rules of the game essentially provide an overview of the processes and procedures of each stage of what I've called the sitting edition. So they are amended and finalised each year, but the rules of the game are very, very tailored to that specific year's edition. It will give precise dates and times, for example, for deadlines of assessments, when we should be able to communicate to participants they have been selected, when the simulation dates themselves will be finalised, when participants will be expected to complete their evaluations at the close of the simulation, and so on. So the rules of the game are the handbook specifically for that year's edition, and it's really important we always have the rules of the game for each year, because they basically are like a secondary standing order document for that edition. So once we have the handbook and we have the rules, we know what the processes are for the broader sense of the Padova model. As I touched on earlier, management design is primarily from the Secretariat. So how do we practically design and organise the Secretariat? So as I touched on earlier, we have a sort of recruitment process arising from the evaluation post the previous year's model. Now, external recruitment's a possibility, And the Secretariat this year, we are delighted to have 1 or 2 students who have not participated in the Padova Model UPR and are also not students at Padova. And that is great because they're bringing their own unique experiences based on their professional employment history to the Secretariat. But key to the organisation's Secretariat is having some assessment, self-led assessment of existing skills and experiences, which helps members select their preferred teams, so concept or communications teams, as I said earlier. And the reason why it's independent led is that it allows for a more harmonious Secretariat where people are occupying the roles, not just that they want, but they know they can really excel in, because this is a voluntary basis, right? So we're really relying on Secretariat members voluntarily bringing their skills and their experiences and their insights to the table, and allowing that independent self-led assessment of skills means that we know people are in the positions they want to be in, and therefore they will enjoy being in and contribute fully both to the Secretariat and then obviously to the design and delivery of the Padova Model UPR more generally. What's very important for organisation of the Secretariat is internal leadership. And this year I had a process where I encouraged people to consider themselves to be leaders for the concept and communication teams as distinct groups. And building on previous years, I actually suggested a co-leadership structure. So we would have 2 leaders for each team to really allow for shared work and shared coordination, but also that sense of reducing pressure and stress, because our Secretariat members are students and they will have their own student lives as well as their own work commitments. When we can have task allocation and shared responsibilities, we reduce stress and we therefore allow for people to enjoy their time on the Secretariat. But it's very important that we have identifiable leaders, people who are willing to oversee task design and management within their teams to overall ensure we meet our targets of the tasks that we need to do to allow for the practical design and delivery of the Padova Model UPR. So this includes organisation of work plans. Each team will have a work plan that spans from when they first meet in March of the academic year up until the design and delivery of the Padova Model UPR in November of that year. So it's almost a year-long process, and we will ensure we have identifiable tasks and timeframes in mind right from March of the start of the process. We also have to have organisation scheduled, so specific tasks on a weekly or monthly basis, and then meeting arrangements. Ideally, we will have team meetings for both concept and communications every week, and every month we will have 1 big meeting of the full Secretariat. That allows for great coordination, but also ensuring everyone is on the same page, and if there are any issues or challenges or sudden questions that need decision making, everyone is aware and therefore can contribute to discussion, and then we have collective decision making, which is really important. What's important to consider for the Secretariat organisation would be communication platforms and work platforms. At the minute, we utilise Google Drive as a shared drive for all our information, our files, our work plans, our templates, our rules of the game design structures, and WhatsApp for our chats and our conversations in organisation, and we meet on Zoom. And it's very important that we have those identifiable platforms because it allows for streamlining and more efficiency, really. But there could be different platforms, and we're, like I said, always considering what's best for us. And if in the future we decide that we want to move hosting our data to another platform that's more convenient, we can certainly do that. And then we also have smaller teams at the minute for corresponding elements of design of the evaluation criteria, for example. And that's something that's arisen by internal leadership in the Secretariat this year. It was decided that that would be their preferred work structure. And we're going to have an evaluation process, I think, at the end of the Secretariat in November this year to see how we felt that went. But it goes to show again, the Secretariat can be designed and structured whatever way the members think is more efficient and effective. And that's a really key takeaway, I think, for anyone who's wishing to replicate this model. So just to quickly show you what the organisation can look like really heavily utilising Excel sheets, for example, to show a breakdown of the months, the tasks. We identify tasks in advance and we set ourselves timelines and deadlines. Because like I said, the Padova Model UPR is conducted in stages. Some of those stages will happen simultaneously, and there'll be simultaneous deadlines for the concept and comms team. And that's why communication and coordination and having this type of visual prompt or visual grid is so important to allow for effective teamwork, coordination across teams, to allow for then effective delivery of those tasks to help for the design of the project. Now, in terms of project management, it's probably quite evident from the previous slides, there is a lot of work and the time frame is quite tight from March until November, but ideally the simulation is designed and ready to go from September. So a real key point I wish to emphasize in terms of a takeaway is timeframe considerations. The Padova Model UPR cannot be delivered in a couple of months, and this is something which starts in March, and probably actually, if in an ideal world, we would start it in February, maybe even at the end of January, to allow for more time. So it's something that if people were wanting to consider recreating this project, you would probably need at least, especially if you're starting from scratch, one full academic year to seriously think about how this would look before then subsequently commencing the design of a program like this in the next academic year. And as I alluded to, the design is comprised of stages, and coordination across those stages is just essential. And it's one of the reasons why we work in partnership with the Human Rights Centre as well as senior staff. Because if there's any difficulties arising, then we know there's another person to talk to. There's someone else who can give guidance and support where necessary and where needed. And we really tap into an institutional memory, I suppose, when it comes to Padova Model UPR. And the great thing is also that once you serve in the Secretariat, it's almost like an alumni network. So if there's ever any questions or a need for support, there will always be someone who can either give that answer or provide that support or signpost for that year's Secretariat. And it's one of the reasons we have the role of facilitator. Prior to myself, there was an excellent colleague, I'm going to say Ling Han, who served as facilitator for many years of the Padova model. And essentially without Ling, we wouldn't be here, I think, still today overseeing this project. And it just demonstrates that there needs to be someone, I think, providing support, reminding people of tasks and deadline management, and tapping into their own experiences to see the Secretariat through, particularly those designs of stages where there's a lot going on and it's very fixed, tight deadline. I alluded to earlier the evaluation processes, where we constantly look at could we do things better, whether that's accessibility, communications, advertising from the comms team. Part of the design of the programme is to constantly reflect on previous editions of the project. And I suppose project scale, I've included here in terms of broader design around. For us in the Padova Model UPR, we can accept applications from essentially students as a team anywhere. But we're at that stage in our journey, I suppose, that we have the capabilities to do so. For any Model UPR process seeking to start from the beginning, the geographical reach might be a bit smaller until you're confident in the process and the application and the simulation itself that you can then expand. And then student engagement, part of the design of the programme is really trying to tap into as many institutions as possible and utilising as many platforms to do that as possible. And that requires a lot of planning. And this year we researched, for example, departments and faculties of universities across Europe, which specialise in international human rights law and political science in the context of international relations, to identify academics who could help us share the word and disseminate information about the Padova Model UPR and advertise the application process. So that itself requires work and research to be conducted from the Secretariat and the facilitator where necessary to tap into existing networks and partnerships to really design and deliver this type of project. So in the next couple of minutes, I'll just look at then how we practically design and deliver those respective components I had identified at the beginning of the presentation. So you will notice, by the way, there is a very common theme around reviewing, looking at feedback, and that's because it's a constantly shifting project. Padova Model UPR, we learn from each previous edition. So for the design and the simulation entire, this requires looking at the previous edition as Secretariat members on the basis of your own experience. We had some fantastic discussions in March and April, particularly from the concept team, of people willing to say, as a participant in the 2022 edition, this is what I enjoyed, this is what I think could be improved on, here's what I would like to work on to try to make things maybe clearer for this year's edition. You need to have the willingness to have those conversations and to engage with the feedback you receive in your evaluation process to consider if there's a common thread, maybe that means something does need to be changed or to be modified. We then have discussions around work plans and timeframes. So whether that's when do we want to have the application launched, when do we want to have the application form designed, who will be leading on outreach to academics to help disseminate information about the Padova model. That would all be incorporated into the work plan. And when I had alluded to earlier to the importance of collective decision making, this is one such area where you need to have collective decision making. You cannot possibly proceed with the design of a simulation when you haven't had the opportunity to discuss what actually is the work that needs to be conducted. How do we break that down into identifiable tasks? Who will lead in that work and who's happy to lead in that work? Because without that type of coordination and communication, the work just simply will not be undertaken, and the simulation cannot be delivered upon. We then look at, as I alluded to earlier, the handbook on the basis of our own experiences and participants' feedback, and then design the new rules of the game for that sitting edition. But I think one of the most important elements of the simulation design is the selection of rules. So we design criteria to help us identify the states who will be the participating states for that year's edition. And that requires the Secretariat members who are on the concept team to conduct their research, to look at the past experiences and participation, recommendations, expressions of concern made by the UPR mechanism or within the UPR mechanism to different states. Because for us, we want to ensure the simulation is as authentic as possible. So if we can have a range of states which have a range of human rights issues identified that can allow for participants to really become enmeshed in the experience, that would be great. So after that research is conducted in accordance with the criteria that's designed by the Secretariat and the concept team, it's all done following the actual authentic UPR cycle itself to really ensure authenticity. And it also means then if we, for instance, we can't select states that are in the process of undergoing the UPR, because then that means participants can technically follow along with the real life simulation and it doesn't allow for a really authentic experience. Also then, as part of the simulation design, we have the design of the training programs. Again, that's something that's evaluated on the basis of previous years. The training programs are designed and led by the Secretariat, so allowing for them to really develop their skills in knowledge dissemination and learning dissemination. And it can also change each year depending on the feedback and the, I suppose, the perceptions and expressions of knowledge from the Secretariat themselves. But traditionally, the training is designed in a way that we work on the basis of the roles. So all the state members, your participants, will be trained in a group, INGOs within their own group, and NHRIs within their own group. Although we may actually change that this year, that's ongoing. But that's also conducted alongside resources to be put on our Moodle platform, and with the support and assistance of external guest speakers, which I'll touch on later. As I said, we have the Moodle platform, which helps us assist with the simulation. And that's really important because it's through there we can have alliance building being conducted. We have an interactive forum for questions and answers from participants, and it's also where participants will upload their assignments that the Secretariat will then download and mark accordingly. And then also, as part of that, something I really want to emphasize within the simulation, we need to have some sort of incorporation of social engagement. If one of our objectives is relationship building and partnership building with other institutions and students across Europe, within the simulation, there should be some type of social activity, whether it's part of the training program, like an icebreaker aspect, or something that's conducted on site. That social engagement is really, really important to be incorporated in your design. And I had just included some screenshots of our criteria that we use to select those representative roles, but I'm conscious of time, so I'll make these slides available, and then subsequently you can review that criteria yourself. I really want to emphasize the importance of promotion and outreach, because I think sometimes we can be so focused on designing the simulation itself, what it will look like on site, what will the roles be, who will we select, that we forget what's really important is getting the word out that the Padova Model UPR is taking place again this year, and these are the representative roles, and here's how you apply. So the comms team really lead on this from March throughout that calendar year and throughout the summer up until autumn. We have to be cognizant of social media and even changes in social media. 2 years ago when I was a participant, I think LinkedIn and Twitter were the most accessed or most used by applicants. This year, it's probably going to be Instagram, and who knows, maybe even something like TikTok. So constantly being aware of where we can find our target audience and how do we reach them and share the information we need them to be aware of. So utilizing all existing platforms and channels and monitoring access and engagement, and having discussions about content and how we generate content that can be accessed and then hopefully stimulate interest in the Padova model. That point I've made about self-assessment of Secretariat members on the basis of their skills, professional skills, and their own interests is really important in the communications team. We've been extremely fortunate in recent years to have members who are very, very gifted at making infographics, designing graphics, and making videos. We had a beautiful video made for this year's launch. So I'm still very grateful for the comms team for that. But the comms team will be in charge of thinking about what they will be wanting to advertise, where they will be advertising it, and how they will be advertising it. And again, it comes down to understanding your audience and what's most, clickable and shareable among your audience. And traditionally, we have almost 2 launch dates that the comms team work for as part of the simulation design. Firstly, launching the Padova Model UPR for the year. So this year we had a launch for 2023, advertised the application launch would be forthcoming. And then we launched, our second launch was that of the application itself. And we use social media for the sharing of graphics and the sharing of video materials. And equally important for promotion is engagement with academic institutions. And as I alluded to earlier, there was the research required to look at and identify universities with faculties relevant to the fields that are covered in the Padova Model UPR, and trying to connect with those faculty members to ask could they share information about the Padova model and the application process. And that work is constantly ongoing. And I've been trying to encourage the Secretariat members this year to think about their own experiences, who they know as a lecturer, who maybe taught them or taught a friend, who could be interested in sharing something like this and sharing the message more widely. So even being aware of your own networks is something that you can contribute as a Secretariat member. Similarly to the concept team, in terms of that sense of the databases and the documents that you work from, the organisation aspect of promotion outreach, I'm aware of one of our previous episodes in these webinar series has been around how we use communications, and comms grids and social media planning is paramount for the practical design and delivery of the Padova Model UPR. We need to know what messages we're sending out on a weekly basis and how we're doing that, and who is in charge of overseeing the design and delivery of that social media planning and the comms grid, because it allows us to review and reflect on what is working in terms of what is being shared, what's being engaged with, and then thinking about, do we need to put out new content, or do we need to change what platform we're using? How do we tailor our message and the information we want to share for the relevant platform and the relevant channel? We also have engagement with applicants. I nearly said participants, so I keep thinking participants. This is particularly important because when you're on the Secretariat and you're in charge of delivering the Padova Model UPR, you're representing the university. So professional conduct, professional language is paramount on the Secretariat generally, but particularly for those in the communications team. The Secretariat have their own email address and will frequently receive questions or queries from academics, or more appropriately from students who wish to apply. And it's very important that we give same response to the same inquiry. So by that I mean, we ensure everyone who asks about, for example, certain deadlines or what information do I need to put in my application, everyone receives the same information so that everyone has the fair chance of applying, for example. And as part of that, then the comms team will also design and deliver template correspondence that everyone can have access to and everyone can use. It streamlines the process, it's much more efficient, and ensures that we're releasing the same information to anyone who makes the same inquiry. And we always stay on message and there's no confusion that can be generated from that. So the application design is a really important part of the practical implementation of the Padova Model UPR. Again, we always review the previous editions form, both on the Secretariat's own experiences and any information that's provided through the application process at the end of the previous model. And normally what happens is that sometimes we're told, can you shorten the form and shorten the questions? And it's really important that we consider the balance between what makes an accessible application process, as well as what information do we need to ensure we select most appropriate and qualified students to participate so that we have a really good simulation for that year. Eligibility, I put with an exclamation mark. It's really important that we communicate eligibility criteria. We do that very well on the Padova Model UPR, its respective webpage. We still always will receive questions about, can I apply, can I not apply? So part of the application design is being very firm, I suppose, or clear in understanding what you feel makes for an eligible participant, so that they can be able to engage and not be overwhelmed by the process, because it can be quite intensive. Within our existing application design, we really focus on competencies and abilities and existing knowledge and understanding of the UPR mechanism, international human rights more broadly, and also the differences between a state participant, INGO, and NHRI. Our questions might change slightly every year based on what we think makes something clearer or on feedback, but that's really what we look at, because we're trying to ensure that people have the appropriate written communication skills, for example. So again, if they're not overwhelmed, and that we can have a really enjoyable and rewarding experience for all involved in the simulation. A big question that we always ask ourselves, and that might be asked from anyone who wishes to recreate the model in their own institution, is, do you accept team applications or individual applications? And at the minute we accept only team applications. So for instance, up to 6 members for the states. So I think we set it this year to 5. Yeah, it was 5. Normally it was 6 for states, it's 5 this year. 2 for NHRIs and 2 members for INGOs. And there was a previous year where we did accept individual applications, and the Secretariat would say that if that individual application was successful, they could be paired up with another individual application. Last year and this year, we decided against that simply because it requires a lot of time, which the Secretariat just simply don't have. And it also can mean you may not have necessarily a very good working relationship with that matchmade team. Where possible, we really encourage people to apply as teams because they're already existing friends or maybe existing professional colleagues. There won't be any issues around whether they can work together, they can get on or not with each other. So it's a question which can constantly be asked, and we constantly have it under review. But at the minute, we accept team applications only as part of our application design for that basis that reduces the workload in the secretariat. And a pre-designed team should be a team that can work together and therefore be effective and cohesive during the simulation. Whether you wish to accept additional materials beyond questions asked in an application form, we in the Padova Model UPR process ask for language certificates to prove fluency in English, as well as a CV, just to help with the evaluation process, but also to ensure that someone will not be overwhelmed with regards to the English language requirement for the Padova Model UPR. You may wish to consider, if you want to recreate the Padova Model UPR, incorporating a cover letter or a statement of motivation instead of questions. Essentially, it comes down to how best can the process demonstrate someone's existing knowledge and understanding, how they could apply that, and their motivation and what they feel they will learn by being part of the Padova Model UPR. We currently use Google Forms for our application design because it's a streamlined process and it allows for really quick retention and then shifting through application forms. If you were to require, say, for example, a form to be returned by email, you might find that your email inbox could be very full very quickly, and it's easy to lose track of emails or corresponding information. So thinking about how do we ensure the design is something that's streamlined and allows for efficiency in the applying process for the applicant, but then also for us to review the applicant's information. Another important part for us in designing the application process has always been the deadlines and whether or not we have extensions. And it comes back to the point I made earlier about your project scale and the geographical scale of your project's application. We're very conscious that because we have interest in the Padova Model UPR for your institutions in Europe outside of Italy, the academic year can start for different pathways at a different scale across universities in Europe. So that's why this year we have the 2 deadlines I spoke to at the start of this presentation to try to reflect that. Equally, in previous years, we've had one fixed deadline, and then we found ourselves having to extend that to accommodate the different changes in the academic year for Italian universities, for example. So again, it's always a constant process of reflection, but it's very important to the overall application design. You can have a beautiful application form, but if you're not clear about your deadlines and whether or not there's time within your rules of the game structure to allow for an extension, that can really hurt your application process. Arising from that then is the selection design. And again, part and parcel, we look at the previous year's criteria and we think about whether there needs to be change or not. The design of the evaluation criteria is led by the Secretariat, and it really comes down to, and needs to correspond with the information that's asked of applicants in the application form. We use a scoring system on a sliding scale for the assessment of application forms at the minute. And that really reflects the band will increase on the basis of preferred, I suppose, competency. So, for example, someone who might have a more advanced background in international human rights law, maybe they're doing a PhD in the matter, for example, versus someone who's only at a bachelor level, the former will receive more points than the person at the latter. But we also try to really ensure that it's a positive marking system and not a negative system. So we don't mark against someone. We constantly are trying to find ways to award marks to someone. It's a much fairer process and it's a much more positive process, which I think means then it's easier for the Secretariat, but we're approaching these applicants as people, you know, and we're understanding their different experiences and insights and whether that can be very enriching for everyone else during the simulation. But we do, again, focus on competencies. How do we mark that, and how do we mark existing knowledge and understanding? And also that sense of motivation, what really is inspiring the applicant and their team to apply for the role they have stated is their preference. What's very important to consider is how you organise the evaluation of these applications. It's secretariat-led again, and usually they work in teams on the basis of their own experiences. So someone who served as an NHRI in their own time of the model will probably mark the NHRI applications because they understand that process and they understand the motivations for applying to serve as an NHRI. But it's important to have what I've called a dual marking system, or the first and second reviewer. Every application that's received should be marked or at least assessed twice. And that means then we can have harmony in the fixture of marks. It also means that if someone were to say, I know that person, or I recognize someone in that team, we swap them out and bring in someone else instead. So there's neutrality, and then we can ensure a very fair process for everyone. In terms of the design and delivery of the training structure, again, we review the previous edition and we consider the feedback received as part of the evaluation process. We constantly are thinking about how to make the training program fun. I realise that's quite a nerdy thing to say, but because we deliver our training on Zoom and the sessions can be 1 to 1.5 hours duration, it's really important that we start to incorporate interactive elements or components. We provide additional resources, that you provide PowerPoint slides, maybe even in advance of the sessions so that people can follow along. At the Padova Model UPR, we're really proud to say that we've always been able to provide guest speakers as well, at least 3 guest speakers every year of the training programme. So the way we look at it, we might be covering the theory of how you interact in a model UPR and how that reflects with the wider UPR process. But then our guest speakers can come and actually speak to their own professional experience in that field. So it's a really great learning opportunity for our participants, particularly for those who might be interested in pursuing that career themselves, to hear from someone who works in an existing NHRI, for example. And that also helps the Padova Model UPR, I think, stand out in other simulations, that we have had the relationships that have been built over many years to allow for people to come in and deliver those external speaking opportunities. Then also, as I said earlier, we constantly refer to the handbook, which is our simulation blueprint, because we're trying to emphasise to participants that they should be following the handbook during their time with us in the Padova Model UPR. So we try to design and deliver our training around the respective chapters of the handbook, so everything aligns and helps bring everything together, I suppose, for the participants. And something that's important as well for consideration in that sense of issues or challenges, where do we go with the Padova Model UPR, is attendance requirements. At the minute, it's compulsory if you are a participant to attend all training sessions. We can allow, obviously, for extenuating circumstances. The reason why we do that is because it's so vital that everyone attends the training, because you will need to work with your teammates, and you can't expect only one person to attend the training, particularly in the States team, which is up to 5 or 6 members. Previously, we used to mark attendance. Last year, due to some scheduling clashes with an exam at Padova, we then facilitated people withdrawing from the relevant training session, and instead we incorporated a requirement for all the recordings to be watched and a mini test to be sat. We might consider incorporating that as a requirement for everyone this year, just to really ensure that if there's any gaps in knowledge or in understanding, we can address them before the simulation. As otherwise, what can happen is people might attend a training program. You may not be aware if there's any issues or queries. Not all participants will email to ask for help, is what we've also noticed. So we need to consider, how do we give opportunities for questions to be asked, to sort of make sure there's no confusion or uncertainty going into the simulation where there isn't time really to retrain people. So that sense of maybe of having a mandatory test can allow for the Secretariat to identify, as I say, any knowledge gaps, so any potential issues can be resolved before the simulation, and therefore the simulation isn't impacted by any confusion. And then I'll move on to the actual practical design of, when I say the model UPR here, I mean the on-site simulation that takes place in November. The dates differ every year, but it's always in November. What's really paramount here in terms of the practicalities of a simulation, do you have the capacity on site to both host the formal components, the lobbying components, and the social components of an on-site simulation? The lobbying aspect is also particularly important because you need to have the space for venues that can allow for closed door lobbying as well as more open site lobbying. And it needs to be conducted in a way that participants know where they're going. It's something as straightforward as that. Every year something has been conducted on site, there are always at least 1 or 2 participants who are lost or don't know where they're going. So communication of how practically the simulation is conducted and where it's conducted and the times that participants are expected to be in attendance at is really important to convey if you're on the secretariat of the Padova Model UPR. The importance of professional conduct, diplomatic language, diplomatic presentation is paramount, and we regularly run through what I called there earlier, the standing orders, the procedures that are outlined in the rules of the game to remind participants that once the simulation takes place, once they are on site for the practical design of the simulation, they need to act as though this is their real role, this is who they really are, to allow for a really authentic experience. 2 other aspects to cover, the potential to have support teams on sites to address any questions or queries as they arise is something I think that could be considered going forward. It was identified last year when some people had issues with lobbying, some people couldn't access Moodle, some people didn't know how to submit their assignments. When all you have is an email address and you don't have a formal mechanism for someone to be approached, particularly on that team-based basis, so someone in the secretariat in charge of the INGOs, for example, it can cause a bit of confusion and a bit of delay. That means people feel more stressed when they shouldn't be. So it might be worthwhile to consider that. And then also the design of the evaluation process or a document, how that looks, what format it takes place in, and what is your time frame to allow for your participants to complete the form post-model UPR and return that data to you so you can begin the process of reviewing it and reflecting on it. We extended the deadline for last year's model, so it took place over Christmas and into January in the hopes that would allow for people to give more of a detailed response than had they been required to do so on site immediately after simulation when they were tired. And I do think at least it did help. We did receive much more detailed responses than what we would have had based on the comparison of the forms from the previous years, but we didn't have as many responses. We had about a response rate of maybe about 70% last year, but we did receive more complete data. So it comes down to what you'd rather see, more responses or maybe more of a detailed response on what's important to you progressing forward. And then just on that evaluation, as I said at the start of the presentation, it's twofold. You're evaluating the participants themselves, but equally they're evaluating you and you're evaluating yourself in conducting the Padova Model UPR. And within our system, we have provision for the award system. So based on performances undertaken with the evaluation criteria designed by the Secretariat, we have awards for the best performing teams in each category. But equally and uniquely, we allow for participants to vote essentially for who they feel based on their experiences deserves an award, which is the participant selected award. And I think it's quite coveted because of that. And it just allows for a really nice end to the process for people to have their hard work recognised. And I suppose going forward, there's that discussion to be had about, do we have the capacity to always return feedback to participants, whether if requested, or should that just be part and parcel? Everyone who participates will receive some type of written feedback, and whether that's an important part of their experience in the model. So then lastly, just to say some reflections or challenges I've touched on in this presentation. Given the wider theme of the webinar series about, so many years of the Padova Model UPR and where do we go, In terms of both, something I think is important to consider, but also recognize as a challenge, is the duration of the project and the project management timeframe, and the requirement to be as prepared, or rather to start the preparation as early as possible. So as I said, we usually start in the March of the academic calendar for something to be taking place in November. And ideally, I think we should really be starting in February, just even to spend a couple of weeks for the secretariat members to really get to know each other, and to have maybe more time to consider what groups they want to work in, and to understand the secretariat's processes a bit more. Tying into that, as I alluded to in the previous part of the presentation, we don't currently have a formal recruitment process or an application process for the secretariat. It's something that could be considered going forward, or for anyone who wishes to recreate the Padova Model UPR in their own institution, how it's designed and who is serving on it. Then arising from that is the management aspect. At the minute, members of the secretariat volunteer to be the internal leadership and to lead in smaller groups as well. Is that something that could be allocated on the basis of an application form? It is worthwhile to consider. The application design, as I said, that's something that can constantly change each year, and may again change for next year, including even the format. As some students do traditionally say it's too long and they'd much rather just put in a cover letter or CV, but it comes down for us, how do we properly assess competencies, experiences, motivation, and then what can someone bring as part of their team to our Padova Model UPR to ensure a really harmonious and engaging process for everyone who's involved. That sense of participant engagement, how can we monitor participants in terms of their understanding of the Padova Model UPR? If they're not reading the handbook, if they're not engaging with training, do we have to run maybe formal tests? Is that something that could be a way of identifying any issues before the simulation takes place? And that also ties in with participant preparation. How do we ensure that participants feel truly prepared after their training program going into the simulation? And then lastly, simulation location. We did have 2 years where the simulation was conducted online because of the pandemic. It now has returned to being on site. We do deliver the training programs online. It's worthwhile to consider because we have had in recent years some participants continue to participate remotely. So researchers for NHRI, states and INGOs can participate remotely whilst their teammates are participating in site in person. So a kind of a hybrid approach. In light of a post-pandemic world, we have seen that a lot of students prefer learning mediums being conducted online. They're quite used to that now, and it's easier, it might be cheaper. So is that something to consider a more formal hybridized approach, or is it better, particularly considering our objective of community building, relationship building, friendship building, is that something that can only really be fully achieved on site? I personally think that it is, but I stress that's my personal opinion. So I will leave it there for any questions or discussions. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you a lot. Thank you a lot, Leah. It was really, comprehensive for sure, crystal clear. And the only couple of words that I would add to your presentation are that at the end of the day, this simulation is also, this model UPR is also a game. So there are rules, but there are also a rationale behind these rules. And one of the, part of this rationale is there's a little of competition. Okay, so teams and individuals compete among themselves in a safe way, of course, in an inclusive way. I would say it's not savage competition. To show, the idea is to show that they have really understood the meaning, the objectives, the potential of the UPR, of the real UPR, and by implications also of the model UPR. So it's a matter of realizing the real meaning, the sense of what we are doing, and indirectly, but more importantly, the sense of using the UPR to promote human rights. So there is a deep educational, let's say, message behind all this, and you explained this very well. But just add that is a game, is a little competition, and hopefully some fun for participants. I don't think we have much time to share, our thoughts, because it's already 19:28 and we should stop at 30. Maybe we can keep some of our thoughts for next time, meaning next week, when we will have you again to elaborate more about this. Honestly, I think that if we could download the transcription of what you said, we can have some excellent chapter that complement the handbook. Because what is lacking in the current handbook is a sort of reflection, self-reflection about those rules that are there, very clearly stated. So many things that you underlined in your speech should be translated, okay, repeated, I would say verbatim, and put in the book. For example, in the handbook, we have very little about the marking criteria. We have very little about the rationale of the game. So many things are taken for granted in a sense. It's important to make them explicit and disclose the overall objective of our work. But I hope there will be some occasions also next week to delve into this aspect. So for the moment, I think thank you again. Unless someone has among participants have among the attendees have any very short question to ask, you can raise your hand if you have any urgent need. Okay, I see none. So, so thanks Agatha and Leah. Thanks to all participants today, and see you next week. It will be another Thursday. So it's Thursday, the 13th, then is the 20th, and then the last meeting is not a Thursday, but it's a Monday, Monday 21st, 24th. Yeah, and that will be the last one. I hope you can help, getting on board someone else from the Secretariat, and potentially also someone else from applicants or potential applicants. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye now.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Yeah, have a nice evening. Goodbye.